22-year-old Travis is sitting down with Travis today and asking him for the most important advice he could give him to build a successful career. What are you telling him?
Work hard. I'm a big believer that hard work beats talent. Make yourself valuable is the other thing. I think as a young person where you're not really supposed to know anything about anything, how do you make yourself valuable? Right?
Yep.
That was the big thing that I tried to do. I tried to be valuable for you guys as an intern. I tried to be valuable for you guys as a quasi partner, and then tried to create value for clients as I started. It's just, if you can make yourself valuable, and that's what we do at Bathhouse.
Right.
There's value in the market, and we can create a product and an experience that people have value in. So even just starting a career, how do you make yourself valuable in the situation that you're in?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Inside Deal podcast. I'm your host, Sam Schneider. I'm here today with a very good friend of mine, Travis Talmadge, who has done a lot in his career. He has been very successful both in the real estate business and is an entrepreneur and the co-founder of Bathhouse. And we have a lot to get to today, but Travis, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
This is great. So take me back to Bedford, New York, in the 80s and early 90s. What were you like as a kid?
Great place to grow up. I don't know. You'd have to ask my sisters and my dad, but the fun fact is I'm a triplet, so I grew up with two sisters my age. So I was mostly following them around, trying not to get beat up.
Nice. Did you have an entrepreneurial streak growing up? Was there anything that you did to might give a clue that you'd be doing what you are today?
I always liked working. I started working early. So I remember my first job was as an umpire, umpiring Little League Baseball. So I was 13 and I was umpiring the games for like 11-year-olds. And I thought that was a really big deal. It was funny in hindsight. You can appreciate this as a dad, but I made $20 a game, which I was like, I made it. And then, probably wasn't even worth my dad's time to drive me to the game, but it was a great experience. Yeah, so that was
fun fact. I know exactly what you're talking about because I coach my 10-year-old son's Little League, and we have those said 13-year-old umpires that have to deal with crazy dad coaches. So probably where you started to learn how to negotiate.
Maybe. My funny story from Little League was I threw a parent out of a game, and it was not just any parent. It was actually Tim Robbins, the actor. So that's kind of a crazy story. So that's my big memory with my Little League umpire career.
Amazing. So let's fast forward a little bit. You were at Hamilton College. I think you were finishing your sophomore year or your junior year, or early in your junior year.
Yeah, I came to you guys my second semester.
So
second semester junior year, I think.
So your dad said, this is 2007.
Yep.
Your dad said, "Hey, I met somebody that you might be interested in interviewing for an internship. Let's kind of hear your thoughts."
Yeah. So I was a double major at Hamilton College, which is a small liberal arts school, and part of the appeal was there was no core curriculum, so you could do some interesting stuff. So I was a double major in photography, which was really captivating to my attention, and then economics, which was just because I was scared shitless about getting a job. So I thought, let me do an econ major. And so there was this program called the New York program where you could go to New York. They take, I think, 15 kids every semester, and you could do a full-time internship, and you took a couple classes, but it was really to work a 40, 50-hour work week. And so I was funneled into getting an internship at a bank as an econ major. And so I had gone and interviewed at a bunch of banks, a couple of which don't exist now, and kind of just had this interesting experience where it was kind of a foregone conclusion that was going to be the track of the career. And I just really, it didn't sit with me. I couldn't see myself doing it. I didn't like the culture of it. So I felt a little lost. So I was talking to my dad, who's a real estate developer. And he said, well, why don't you check out Brokerage? I think you might be good at it, and you'll at least learn A to Z on a deal. And I met these two really interesting guys. This guy, Sam Schneider, he said, maybe I'll call him, see if he'll talk to you. And there you are.
Amazing. So for background, your dad, who is a very successful real estate developer in the city, had decided to hire us to sell his building. That's where I met him, and he told me about his son and if we were looking for any interns. So I said, yes, we are,
Yeah.
whether we were or not. And met you in Eastern Consolidated's office in 2007.
Yeah, I don't know if you guys got the good end of the deal because the building didn't sell, but you got me. So
We definitely got the good end of the deal.
small world.
So what were your thoughts coming in to interview for real estate investment sales internship? And how much did you know about it? How much did you know about real estate? And obviously your dad was in the business,
Yeah.
but was it something you thought was interesting from an early age, or just something you wanted to try new other than finance?
No, to be honest, I knew exactly nothing about it. I really didn't know anything about real estate. I knew my dad owned a couple buildings and that was what he did for business, but it was basically the end of it. And my experience was really shaped by you and Danny, where I came in and not knowing anything about anything. I thought, man, this is interesting. People seem excited. It seems like people are making a lot of money in this space. There seems to be kind of this interesting thing where there's old people, there's young people, there's kind of people of all different shapes and sizes professionally. And, everybody seems to be hustling. And so I don't really know what that means for me, but it seemed like there was some opportunity there. And there was a lot of energy in 2007 when I interviewed with you. Kind of walked in and it was one of those scenes that I remember really vividly where, everybody was wearing really nice suits. It was clear everybody was doing well. The market was kind of on a high. And so that was exciting. And then I came back and it was like all the air left the room because, things had changed in the market in 2008. But that was almost more exciting because there was clearly a moment happening and I didn't know what it meant back then, but it was definitely a time of transition.
So 2007 was obviously a very, very busy time and, very exciting time in the real estate business in New York City. And you were working with me and Danny, and you were doing a phenomenal job, by the way. You went back to school.
Yep.
And we wanted, we were trying to persuade you to come back, and you agreed to come back. So then you came back, and it was 2008, or the end of 2008 or 2009?
2009. After I graduated, because my internship with you guys was 2008.
So a lot had happened.
Yes.
Talk to me about the difference when you walked back and kind of when you came back to Eastern, what the environment was like, what the morale was like, and kind of the differences between that and 2007 / early 2008.
I think in a lot of ways, it was like everything had changed, but nothing had changed because my experience was really working with you guys and you guys had such a great confidence and enthusiasm that, just, it felt like everything was good because I was working with the right people. But I think it was interesting. You saw a lot of people that had a lot of success and were kind of veterans in the space that, at least from a young man's perspective, that was pretty green, were kind of sitting there not knowing what to do with themselves. So when I came in, I was just nervous about trying to figure out how to make money. And for anybody listening at home, this was a commission job. So, it was eat what you kill. And on the side, I was doing focus groups to make $100 a pop or something. It was like, we got to figure it out. But it was exciting because everybody seemed a little bit stunned by what had happened. And for me, I kind of had nothing but upside. So it was a really convenient time to not know anything, be starting from scratch because everybody was kind of starting from scratch all over again because the market had been so disrupted.
What were the major lessons and takeaways when you look back to those super early years at Eastern that you kind of took away from there, and kind of lessons that kind of helped you going forward?
I think the first thing was it was really appealing to me and my personality, where you and Danny at the time were quite young, right? Would you agree? I mean, you guys were kind of these young stars in the business. And so, that was very cool for me to be working with you guys. But B, was really encouraging and exciting because, it was very clear that there were no rules on who was going to make money or that you had to pay your dues, you had to do this. If you could make deals, there was no kind of chains on you, right?
Yeah.
And so that was really exciting. And then I think the second thing was that, and I learned a lot of this from you and being in the situation, was that there was some subject matter expertise that was required, but a lot of it was, hard work was going to beat talent and necessarily, expertise. So that was really exciting to me, having zero subject matter expertise and
Yeah.
not a ton of intelligence at the time, in my own opinion, to just be like, okay, I can work really hard and I can create value by, making a lot of calls, making a lot of relationships, trying to be a little bit gritty and really hustle here. And that was the big thing that was really interesting as a kid starting his career who, I don't think was particularly smart or didn't really know much about anything, but just had the forum to be able to work hard and get rewarded for that.
I think that's one of the most important things when you talk about advice to to kids coming out of college or early in their career is they're in a place where they're able to kind of it's a meritocracy and hard work will be rewarded and titles aren't as important as actual results. And also being able to be in an environment where you're able to use your best skills, like what I like to call like your 90-mile-an-hour fastball. Did you see early on in those really early days a skill set that you had that that was kind of unique to yourself in the sense that it could make you successful?
I think the big thing was I was able to teach myself discipline really early, which I think was partially what rubbed off from you guys. I saw you guys hitting it hard, and so I wasn't going to sit there and slack off. I was like,
Right.
okay, they're working hard. I'm here to work hard, and seeing that you're there, and since it was a commission eat what you kill business, it was like, all right, every minute that I'm not working is every minute that I could be making $1 here. So that's exciting. Let me throw myself into that. And then I think the other thing was, there were a couple things that in hindsight that maybe I didn't realize at the time that really were valuable. One was, you guys, to me, I think kind of had disrupted the way that model was working. It was really appealing to me, where traditional brokerage was people would go out and they would try and get listings and buildings sell, and then they try and figure out a buyer for them. And that was really how most of the business worked, especially at Eastern.
Yep.
And you guys, from the moment I met you guys, really kind of went the other way and went backwards, where you were like, hey, we're making relationships with these really interesting buyers. We know who the best buyers are for whatever kind of building is hot right now. And we're going to focus all our attention on finding those buildings. I thought, man, that's really interesting, right? You're working the other direction from the whole market. And so I think that made it really appealing, because as a young guy why would you hire a 21-year-old kid to sell your building, right?
Right.
There's a bunch of other people that can do a better job. But if a kid comes to you with a relationship and he's clearly got the best buyer for an asset, well, now there's a conversation to be had.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, I would say that was really interesting, was just having a really clear focus that made a lot of sense, right? It wasn't a fallacy. It worked and it made sense. And being able to just work on that one thing, consistently until it produced results, that was a big lesson.
It's really interesting you say that, because that's actually kind of what got us to the point of saying, you know what, we wanted to get back to the principal side of the business, because most of the deals, as you know, that we were doing at Eastern were completely off market.
Yep.
And we were doing everything from finding the deal to making the relationship with the seller to valuing it for the seller, and kind of all the legwork in between. And then when that seller said, okay, I want this price, we brought the buyer in who was, kind of, the top buyers in that category. And what we saw was, a lot of times those buyers weren't even putting up their own money. They were using, whether it was private equity funds or other people's money. And we saw that, the real way to be able to buy, the real skill is being able to secure and negotiate the right deal for the right price. And we were doing that, and we said, it's time. So we came to you with a proposition towards the end of 2009, and we said, hey, listen, we are, we're going to be leaving Eastern Consolidated. We're starting our own company, Imperium Capital. We'd like you to be the first employee in, and we're going to be focusing on buying buildings, but using the same skill set. We'd love to kind of hear your thought process. I don't think we've ever even talked about this. As a kid right out of college, or really joined his career, that thought he had a job at a well-established investment sales firm, and then a little different from what he thought. So we'd love to kind of hear what your thoughts were then.
Yeah, I mean, not to take the air out of the balloon, but it wasn't a hard decision for me. So, I think when we did that and we left, and it was Imperium from Eastern. I think that was roughly 5-6 months after I graduated, 6 months after I graduated. And so if I remember, I'd done my first deal right before that, which 6 months doesn't sound like a long time. It felt like an eternity for me. And I remember one conversation you probably remember we had at the gym. We used to go to the gym together every night. And I thought I wasn't going to make it. I like basically broke down. You were great. I really thought, man, I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I don't know if I could do this. You encouraged me to hang in there, made that deal. And then, the rest was history. But so at that point, I kind of made this one deal, which was huge, because it was like, okay, I can actually do this. I did it.
It becomes real.
Right. I did it. Right. Got a huge check that was more than my other friends' salaries. And I was like, okay, cool. And I think I can do it again, So like now we've proven it once. So for me, it was an easy decision. And I want to keep working with you guys. So that was honestly more exciting in a way, because it was like, okay, cool. Got the momentum of the first deal. Now there's even less rules than before. There's no civil war with all the other people, which was the interesting thing. One of the other things that's changed the way I work. Eastern was just an amazing place. And I think much like you, I'm very grateful to them. It was this, family-owned business and two incredible people that owned it. And they were just amazing. But I think by nature in the brokerage business, it always felt a little bit like a civil war in there, because you were always competing against people in the office, and then you had to go compete with people for business. So it was really exciting to me to go where it's like, all right, cool. Me, Sam, and Danny were all on the same team. All that nonsense that just comes with brokerage firms, mid or large firms, is now gone. And we just get to go fight everybody else outside. And so that was a really easy decision.
100%. Yeah, it was a really awesome time, and you were kind of integral in a bunch of our early deals. Why don't you talk to us about what the setup was like at early Imperium, and a couple of deal stories or early deal stories that you liked, or things you look back on and you learned a lot from.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I remember about the early Imperium days, because I think it was a 2.5-3 year run, something like that. And one of the things you guys have always done really well that I've always tried to follow is, don't go where you want the market to go where the market's telling you to go. And so back then it was all multifamily. It was all value add multifamily, at least in the first year or so. I remember really clearly. And so that was everything I was working on. And so I remember, some crazy deals. I remember, we did a deal with a big family that owns a lot of multifamily in New York. And it was right off Gramercy Park. And I remember that whole deal happened in one afternoon. Where, if you remember, I rolled up with him to the seller's office on a Friday, which was Shabbat. And this was an Orthodox buyer. And from the time we got to the office, he did all the diligence, did the contract, and we signed it in 6 hours. And so that was like a perfect case study for the market back then. It was really nuts. There weren't a lot of deals happening, but if you found one, you had everybody's attention, it would get done really quick. So some exciting stuff like that. And then Soho Square, which was really the biggest deal of my career to that point. And I would say really was kind of a launching pad for confidence. And that was an interesting one, because notoriously, I remember the first time I brought up that deal, the seller's name was Earl, and I ran into the office and I said, hey, I had this great conversation with this guy who owns this building. And I remember Danny leaned back and he's like, that guy's never selling.
Right.
And I was like, let's see. And then lo and behold, it seemed like nothing. And then all of a sudden conditions changed and we were right there. And so I think that was a really interesting lesson of, no is sometimes a temporary answer, and relationships are really important. I would say more than anything, that was one where I really built a relationship, earned his trust, respected the boundaries that he had put for me. And then on a moment's notice, things can change. And I was right there to do that deal.
Follow-up is key. I think the thing that's really interesting about, and this is a $200 million purchase, a huge deal, especially for someone who'd only been in the business for a few years. But I think the thing that was really interesting about that is not only did you do that, he gave you a price, when you first started talking to him, and it was a price that that no one was going to pay
at the time.
Right. And then you followed up with him, and you kept on, you kept the relationship, and he liked you, And then I think he called you a year later, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was something like a year later.
Yeah, I
He was
called him
like,
when I was
right,
21, and this deal happened when I was 22. So it was
right.
over a year.
So you followed up with him for over a year,
Yeah.
and then he gave you the price. We were ready to go, and kind of one thing led to another.
Yeah. Yeah. And to your point, it's interesting. At the time, it was such a round purchase price, $200 million, which, in 2000, what was that, 2010, 2011?
Yeah,
You know,
2000. Yeah,
that would
2000.
be $500,000 today,
Yeah,
basically,
yeah,
so it was or $500,000,000 rather. So it seemed like a crazy price at the time. And then it kind of got less and less crazy. But then in a moment's notice, it went from being a reach to actually being an incredible deal,
yeah,
seemingly overnight.
yeah.
Um,
What I think is really interesting is, and this is for anyone that's looking to buy or or do deals. There's kind of multiple things that you need to know in order to successfully execute a good deal. And then the first thing is information.
yes.
And the market had changed in that year, and um, average rents, I think, went from $30-$40 up to 50 plus,
Like that.
like that.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden he wanted a 4.5 cap, but and we paid him that, but the price per foot was probably half of what it was worth.
Yep.
From from a market standpoint, just because the market moves so quickly. But the reason you were able to kind of take advantage of that is because
We had the information.
you had the information.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. And I think that was the thing that when I look back at it with the benefit of hindsight and playing Monday morning quarterback, I think that was the big thing that was appealing to me about the space. Was I didn't think of it in these exact terms back then, but there was arbitrage in this kind of new information age back then. And real estate is a very old school business. And so it's the last to catch up. And so over the last 10, 15 years, we've really escalated through the information age, and real estate lagged way behind in that. It's like when I first came in and started interning for you guys, you would find out what you could know about a property from a big blue book. They were called the blue books, right?
Blue
it was
books.
like an encyclopedia.
Yep.
And then Property Shark and all these tools came on, but they really weren't great. But no owners had access to that information. And there certainly wasn't Street Easy and, LoopNet and all these comps out there that everybody sees, or things like Traded where everybody knows about every transaction. So the arbitrage was in the information we had, where a guy you talk to wouldn't know what rents the guy 3 doors down was getting from him, or who bought the building or for what price. And so to your point, that was a perfect case study, that deal for arbitrage, where Soho Square had all of a sudden caught on fire with the institutional capital that wanted to buy. A few interesting leases had been signed. This guy didn't know about it. Most people didn't know about it. And so that wave was coming before it hit the shore. And there was a moment there to make a deal.
Absolutely. So what were some of the lessons that you learned at Imperium over your 3+ year stretch that was something that you could never learn in school?
Pretty much everything. I think the big thing was, unless you're going into a specific field, like I said before, subject matter expertise can obviously be really important, but here was more about learning how to think, learning a pulse for a deal, learning how to think creatively. And the big thing was the relationship management. I learned pretty early, people like to do business with people they like.
Yeah.
So brokerage is a field which I think is why you guys stood out, and I think maybe a little bit why I stood out is our mutual friend John Estrich always told me, and it sticks in my head, is that brokerage is for the kids who were the bad kids in school. And so I always considered myself the opposite of that. I was a good boy. And so it's like, well, all right, well, maybe that makes me stand out a little bit. And so I think if you can approach it with kind of, hey, we're going to treat people the right way. We're going to do things honestly. We're going to be really transparent, but we're going to really work hard and nurture those relationships. There's a big opportunity for people to give you a shot. And if somebody gives you a shot and you make good on it, now you're trusted and you've got a reputation. I think that momentum was the other big thing I learned. Was it seemed like it went so quick from like struggling to make a deal, making my first couple deals, boom, anybody will take your call because you've got a reputation for doing deals. And how do you take that leverage? That was another big thing, right? It was a snowball rolling downhill.
Yep.
Where while the market was hot, it was like, once we had a few of these, it was just like shooting fish with a machine gun, or so it's felt in hindsight, because you had the momentum. And I think a lot of people don't always use momentum as leverage, but that was one of the big things I wouldn't have learned in school. Is it's not in books, you're never going to learn it, but like, press the leverage you have.
Yep.
Right. And I think that's something you guys always did really well. That has always been something that I think a lot about, of using the leverage you have and using the momentum you
Your
have.
competitive advantage is
Yep.
everything. I mean, you always want to be thinking about your competitive advantage.
Yep.
And if you can't state what your competitive advantage is, and
You don't have one.
you don't have one. The Inside Deal is proudly sponsored by the Weiser Center for Real Estate at the University of Michigan, a program focused on developing the next generation of leaders in real estate, infrastructure, and entrepreneurship. Through education, mentorship, and industry engagement, the Weiser Center is helping bridge the gap between the classroom and the real world of deals, investing, and innovation. We're grateful for their partnership and support in bringing these conversations to life. So we were out there, we were buying buildings, we were we reinvented a little bit the mold of, how principals go out and buy buildings. We were, everything we found, we found ourselves, and using that skill set with the information and then the hustle, and combine the two of it to go out and find good deals to buy. So you were a young superstar. You decided to start your own company, Triplet Acquisitions, and to focus just go back solely on the brokerage side.
Yep.
Walk me through kind of your mindset and kind of when you realized that you were ready to start your own thing, and also why you decided to focus back into the brokerage space, instead of the investment space.
Yeah, I mean, the aspect of real estate that I really enjoyed was the transaction side. For me, I don't know that it would have mattered back then whether it was buildings or washing machines. I liked the action of the hustle and the relationships and meeting people. And I personally never really cared either way to be in the real estate business. It's not like back then I was saying, oh man, I can start owning these buildings and things. It was, I liked the action of it. The fees and brokerage are really compelling. And so at that time, I kind of thought of it as, hey, there's a hot market here now. I've got momentum. I've got a skill set that I've refined. I think I can go do something with this in the immediate term. And you guys wanted to buy buildings, which I had a great amount of respect for, and just wasn't really my dream. And I wanted to keep doing the transaction volume, the brokerage. So that was the decision, and why it was so amicable was, it was really clear what you guys wanted to do. And then for me, it was like, I really want to focus on being a broker and just doing transactions and kind of hammering that out. So, it was a little scary. I think it's always scary to make a change. But, I'd been doing it. I had confidence in myself. I felt the market was in the right place. And so, took the leap.
So it's awesome. So, what were some of the lessons or the unexpected things that you kind of faced with going from working at a company to owning your own company?
Not to cheapen it at all, but the brokerage business is about as simple a business as anybody could ever have. And I say it as a person now that is in a hardcore operating business that is the complete opposite of that. All you need is a phone and a computer, and you can pretty much do, everything you need to do. So for me, I've always been a little bit of a lone wolf in how I like to work. I don't think I'm particularly good at managing people. I don't particularly like it. I kind of like to, do things myself a lot of the time. And so it wasn't complicated in that way, because the business itself was so simple. It was really just doing deals, and that was really familiar. So I'd say the bigger change was with Bathhouse, but not with that. It was still just the transaction business that I was used to.
So let's get on to Bathhouse and kind of where you currently are now, and it's incredibly exciting. So talk to me about where the idea came from and when you just started kind of kicking it around, and kind of how that came about.
So, had Triplet from, I think it was the end of 2012. And then around, 2016, 2017, the market was still good and was doing a lot of deals. But to me, it seemed like that gap in kind of the information age that I talked about was starting to close a little bit. Market was starting to cool off. And I was getting a little tired of kind of doing the same thing. And just the tough thing with brokerage, which you guys understand, which is why you want to buy, is you're never actually building anything.
Yep.
And so that was starting to be like, okay, cool. Did this thing. I don't think this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I'm kind of looking at other things. And so I was making some passive investments. And I think subliminally, I was starting to kind of figure out what the next move was. And so I'd met my now business partner, who's an incredible guy named Jason Goodman. And we had wanted to work together and we weren't sure what. And so we started looking at some hospitality projects in Montauk and out east, and maybe that was a thing. But it just, we never found the perfect thing where it was like, oh, this is what we're going to do. And so Jason is a little bit older than me, and he had been going to the old school Russian Turkish bathhouses in New York for like 20 years.
In East Village.
In the East Village. And as you know, I've always been really into fitness and nutrition. And those were kind of the early days of kind of recovery contrast therapy where nobody was talking about sauna or anything except like maybe Joe Rogan or Andrew Huberman, who nobody even listened to back then. It was like the early days. So I was like kind of, contrast therapy curious. I'd like heard about it. And it was Jason's birthday. And he said, well, why don't you come take a sauna with me? And I thought, all right. And I was a little scared because those places are kind of gross. And I'm basically a germaphobe. So I was like, oh, okay. And so I went, and he'd said to me a few weeks before, he said, I think there's really an interesting opportunity to kind of reinvent the bathhouse concept. And I was like, okay, went in one ear and out the other because I was unfamiliar. And we went there, and I remember we left, and I was like, I see what you mean now. Like, this is the thing. We're going to do this. I remember we walked for like 20 blocks when we left there, and we had all the endorphins of the sauna high, and we were basically modeling it out on the street. And so we really quickly dove in. We signed a lease 3 months later, and we were off. It was just like, all right, we're going to do this thing. We're going to figure it out as we go. Found the right space in Williamsburg, which Jason found because his shoe guy moved next door. He saw the space was vacant. He's like, hey, do you think you can call the landlord? I was like, yep, I know how to do that. And went from there.
So you found a vacant retail space.
Yep.
In a good area of Williamsburg.
Yep.
You signed a lease for what, 20?
Yeah, 15, 20 years.
15, 20 years. Yep. So you guys put down the money for the lease.
Yep.
Guaranteed the lease.
Yeah.
Then what?
So the way we did it was, back then, construction market has moved a lot. So Jason had a lot of experience in construction. So with his expertise in that, we were comfortable saying, hey, we're going to basically self-perform here and manage all the subs and basically be our own GC. So we're going to be able to do this pretty economically and on the cheap relatively. But we signed a 10,000 square foot lease. So we thought, man, I think we can build it out for like $250, $300 a foot, which we ended up doing it under $300 a foot. And it was a manageable enough project where our deal was, hey, we'll put the money up. Him and I could afford it. And we said, we'll go out. I'll make a couple calls. If somebody wants to come in, maybe we'll raise half the cash. And if not, we're comfortable doing it. We ended up making a few calls, and a handful of people said, yeah, we're interested in that. So we raised about half the money, and then half of it was ours. And we kind of did what we could afford,
So how did you guys go? Did he have the experience to go through the building department? Because this is not just an ordinary construction. I mean, you're building,
pools,
you're building
saunas.
pools and saunas in the middle of a urban environment. Like how did that go?
I think a skill set that I've developed that Jason is also really great at, that I think a lot of entrepreneurs like you are really great at, is you get comfortable figuring things out, And so for us, we knew we had to hire an architect. We knew we had to hire an expediter. We tried to design this thing that we had no idea. We were consumers, but we didn't really know what we were designing. We worked with this amazing architect named Jennifer Carpenter, who was just amazing and is so whip smart and was so patient with us. And I remember we walked to her office in Chinatown every week to keep the design going. And we kind of figured it out, and we figured out what we need from Department of Health and the Department of Buildings. And it was messy, and we made mistakes, and, didn't know that we didn't know that thing. And you just kind of try to keep marching forward. And then you do it, and you've learned all this knowledge that then you have forever.
So opening night,
Yep.
how long did it take you to build the whole thing out?
So it took us about 2 years because, to your point about the DOB, there was the landlord had never. It was an old soda factory. It was the Dr. Brown soda factory, and so there was actually no first floor in the building. It went from the basement to the ceiling of what is now the first floor, and there were these big turbines and pieces of equipment. And there was a little bit of a mix up about the first floor having been filed and legal. So we caught a little bit of a snag in there where that had to be refiled, and that took some time. And there was this old thing that doesn't exist anymore called a physical culture establishment permit. It was basically a Giuliani era thing where they wanted to make sure that new brothels weren't built. So you had to file this and get approval. It was a formality, but it took about 6 months. So all these things took a little time, but it took about 2 years. So we opened November 15th, 2019.
So when you told people that you knew from the real estate industry and personally,
Yep.
did they think you're crazy?
Yes.
That's how you know you're on the right track.
Yeah. Well, there's a connotation, or there was a connotation then with bathhouses, which is why we named it Bathhouse. It was like, all right, we're going to go all the way into this thing. And America really had no history with bathhouses. And so that was part of the opportunity for Jason and I. That's what was exciting about it. The only little bit of history that existed was, something a little naughty. And there was a big place in gay culture in the 80s and 90s. And so you talk to anybody over the age of 50 and that's what they thought a bathhouse was.
Amazing. So we'll get back to opening night. So opening night or opening day,
Opening day. Yep.
Opening day. How'd it go?
So we were super excited. The fallback that Jason and I talked about that is still great about our business is most of our OpEx is effectively tied to demand. So the busier we get, the more our OpEx grows. But if it's slow, you can actually run it very, very efficiently. And so at first, like, Jason was working the desk. I think we had maybe 1-2 people on tops. Like, it was a skeleton team. And the joke with me and Jason was, if it ever isn't as good as we think, like, he can work the desk, I can pick up towels and we'll be okay,
Right.
And so I remember day one, we open at like 9 o'clock, whatever it is, and there's a girl there waiting to get in. I'm like, oh my God, wow, amazing. And I remember she went downstairs and another customer didn't come for like 3 hours. And I just remember like kind of going downstairs every once in a while, checking. This girl had the best time of her life, sitting there reading a book, had the whole place to herself. I was like, oh my God, like, we spent all this money, like, it's a disaster. Nobody's going to come. And then 2 days later, we had a line around the block. So it just like, it just changed on a whim. I guess the neighborhood caught wind of it. And that was it.
How did you guys like solve for PR or advertisements beforehand? And like, how were you confident that people, besides your own interest in it, that people were going to come?
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty grassroots back then. The big thing was we put these pictures of these snow monkeys in the window to try and draw some interest of kind of what's happening there, a little nod to, they were in these natural hot springs. So it implied that there was something like that there. And we tried to build a little buzz. We launched an Instagram. We got some, early coverage in places like Vogue and local New York publications. But it was word of mouth. People would walk by. It was a busy corner. This is a testament to the real estate. Like, we never sacrifice location for this reason, is put yourself where people want to be. A lot of people walking by, even though maybe they weren't holding a bathing suit and weren't going to go in on the spot, they remember, they registered it, they wanted to check it out. And to this day, our best marketing is word of mouth. Somebody goes in, they have a great experience, they tell 10 people. And that domino effect happened relatively quickly.
What was the moment you realized that, hey, I think we actually have something here?
Yeah.
And this, this might actually be like a real business, not just a one-off idea?
I think the first Saturday, honestly, because my son was like 2.5 months old at that point. And so I remember it was Saturday, Jason was there and I came in a little later, and I think I got there around 11:30 in the morning or something. And he met me outside, and I can be the anxious one. And he's like, hey, high five. We have a really good thing here, but by the way, it's really crowded downstairs. And I walked downstairs and we had no idea what our max capacity was because we hadn't met that boss yet. We had no idea. And I remember it looked like a clown car in our neutral pool. I mean, there must have been 35 people in this little pool packed in like this. And so it was a good problem to have because there was a lot of demand. And so from that moment, it was like, all right, cool. We have demand. Now we need to figure out how to kind of ride this bull. And I think that was the moment where it was like, all right, cool. There's demand for this. People want this experience. And then, it was good from there with an interruption by COVID, but
yeah. So
never kind of stopped.
So what I thought was incredible was, you told everyone you were doing this. You had no experience in an operating business, especially a operating business in the hospitality slash, gym slash, spa business. And, unbelievably quickly, it became one of the hottest places in town. And I think you guys, I was just talking to you, privately, you guys were doing incredible numbers and you guys were already profitable. And then just when you think things are good,
pandemic,
maybe the worst business or the worst business you could ever be in.
Yes.
In a global pandemic
in
March
person,
of 2020.
high volume social business. Yeah.
So talk to me about when you started to hear reports in February of things happening and what you and Jason were talking about and what you guys did and how you guys even handled that. And then to the point where everything's shut down and there's a COVID and, the fact that you guys not only survive, but thrive, but that has to be a crazy time in your life. And you guys, I'm sure had to, had many sleepless nights, but what were the strategies? Because I think going through adversity is just table stakes for any successful entrepreneur. And how you handle that adversity is going to determine whether you're successful or not for the long term. So February of 2020.
Yep. February of 2020, you were obviously hearing all the news. Like I remember, it was like more and more news articles. Okay, it was coming here, all this stuff that none of us want to go back and think about. But I remember at some point in really early March, I was down in the space and it was like seemingly overnight where everything was normal. And I remember I was in the space and I could just see everybody was a little hesitant. Everybody was kind of looking and not wanting to get too close to people. I was like, all right, this is weird. So I remember I went home that night and it was the night that they canceled the NBA game, like halfway through the game. I was like, oh God, things are getting so weird here. So I remember I called Jason, we talked through and we were like, all right, I think we got to close down. We got to take a beat for a second. Like this is getting kind of weird.
This is early March now, right?
This was early March. Okay. Felt like the responsible thing to do. So we closed down. And I think literally 2 days later, the government mandated that you shut down. So we were a little early to that. And then, tried to be productive, think about the things that we learned in the first 4 months with the mindset of, hey, we're going to reopen. Let's try and take, we just drank from the fire hose, right? We operated a new business for 4 months. Like, let's try and learn from what we learned and use this downtime. And then as soon as we were allowed to reopen in July, we did that. And granted, we could only operate a fraction of capacity, but we were sold out. Everything we put on the calendar was sold out. And I think that was a testament to people wanted to be as healthy as they can. Sauna is obviously really good for you. So, there's this unknown respiratory virus, whatever. Hey, people want to build up their immune system, be as healthy as they can, get a cardiovascular, workout in, all this stuff. And so people came. And so then as we could go from having, and we kind of had to use our own judgment because you could legally operate at half capacity, but for us, that would have been full capacity because we had public assembly. So we just kind of, figured out what was right. And as we increased capacity from 10 people in the space at once to 12 to 14, blah, 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 all the way up. And it just kind of started to feel normal again. And as we increased capacity, we continued to have demand.
How did you deal with it? Because it wasn't just your money.
Yep.
You had investors.
Yep.
Were your investors, going crazy, with fear? Like, how did you deal? Like, how did you message to your employees and your investors during that time?
Well, I think we had earned some goodwill. We'd gotten off to a hot start. We'd started making money immediately. We were actually getting ready to make a distribution. And fortunately we didn't. And so then March, we did have a bunch of cash and we had to use that cash. And so, we tried to just do the right thing, try and not make decisions out of fear, but try and make the right decisions. And I think that's a good lesson is just, it never really goes well when you try to prevent losing. You know what I mean? Like you have to kind of operate from a place where you can't be thinking too much about fear. You have to just make the right decisions and try and stay rational. And then, people were coming back and we were able to maintain margin even at lower capacity. So I think everybody knew that we were okay. We were going to be okay. And then, you know, fairly quickly when things got back to normal, it was, we were in a really good place because we had taken the downtime in the space to really improve our business and figure out a lot of things that in a weird way, how many times do you get an opportunity where you open a business, you get 4 crazy months where you get to learn so much, and then you get a little bit of time to kind of take a breath and have things be a little slower. So obviously wish that whole thing hadn't happened, but that was the silver lining in it.
That's a huge thing, is being able to take a silver lining of everything that happens, positive or negative, and kind of turning those lemons into lemonade. And I think you guys did an incredible job there. So things are back, things are rocking. Bathhouse is one of the hottest places in New York. Now you're thinking about a second location.
Well, back then, yeah. So we knew our big problem was we made it too small. That was really clear to us, which was a great problem to have. And I don't think we, were, I don't think we were crazy enough to make it bigger than we did back then. So we knew it was too small and we knew we needed to go bigger. And it was a natural fit for us to go to Manhattan, which is a denser, bigger market than Williamsburg. So, COVID happened. And so it was a little bit of a slow time in the leasing market, which means a non-credit tenant can potentially pull off a big deal. And so we found this great space in Flatiron that was an old garage and it was perfect. And it was a little big, 36,000 square feet. But based off what we had seen and the best diligence we could do on what the market was, keep in mind the space that's growing and is, this is a new territory. So nobody had perfect numbers on this.
Right.
And it was certainly a little bit speculative. We thought that we could fill it and that it would do great. And so we built Flatiron and spent a ton of money and raised a little more. And fortunately, we had some money coming in from the business. And that was, it's one thing to start a business, keep it manageable and say, okay, here's a crazy idea, but we're comfortable with the downside. That was a big bet, was to say, okay, we're going to do a 36,000 square foot space, Manhattan construction project, a lot more expensive, the whole thing. And we just tried to focus on building a really great product. And fortunately, kind of same thing with Flatiron. Sold out the first weekend, and it was kind of an instant hit.
Was your vision then, when you and Jason decided to open the second one, that this was going to be a business that you wanted to have, multiple locations and ongoing operating business? Or was it a kind of wait and see, and let's see if we have one in Brooklyn and one in Manhattan, and maybe that's the end of it?
Yeah, I can't, look, I think at the time it made a lot of sense. We were both really excited about the concept and also just that it was such a wide open runway where that space, nobody had done anything to it. There was nothing else like it that existed. It's not like we were copying somebody else's idea. It was like, okay, this is really a novel thing. And then there's thorns in that, right? It's scary for all those reasons. But we thought, okay, this is a completely ungroomed trail. And we found that exciting. So do we think we were going to be opening as many as we are now? Not necessarily. We just thought, you know what? There's a lot of room to grow here if it goes well. So, you always kind of want to stick to the road right in front of you. So it was, hey, let's make a really great product. And it was, okay, there's a lot more demand. The space is a lot bigger than we think. And I think that was one of the big things. Was sure, back then we thought, hey, this is interesting because if it goes well, we've got kind of wide open fields in front of us. But as we started doing it, the addressable market just became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
What was the biggest difference between operating one in Williamsburg and then all of a sudden operating two? And correct me if I'm wrong, but the Manhattan one was like twice the size.
Three times
the size.
Over 3 times the size.
Is the Brooklyn one. So there's a lot of risk there, obviously.
Yeah.
But obviously a lot of reward.
Yeah.
What were the biggest differences as an owner and an operator going from just one to two?
Well, it's interesting. Part of our thesis and the reason we were so fixated on scale and continue to be is that 3.5 times larger location doesn't mean 3.5 times more staff to operate it. There's a lot of efficiency there. So in a weird way, it was almost easier because you had the economies of scale and you had the efficiency of scale. And then I think, being able to set it up, do it the right way, that's really Jason's superpowers. He's just an incredible operator. And so I think the big thing that changed was it had to go from, okay, it's not us living on the location every day and being here for every little problem. It's really about setting up protocols and making systems that are kind of bulletproof. And Jason's a genius with that. So that was the big difference, was to go from, hey, everything's going to be figured out on the fly here because we have one that, we're looking over constantly, and really creating infrastructure and systems to have operations kind of run itself.
And then when you saw how well and smooth that went eventually with those two, is
Yeah.
that when you made the decision, let's take this outside of New York?
Yeah, I mean, Flatiron opened, and even before then, it was kind of interesting. We were getting interest from people. Hey, would you open here? Would you open there? And so we were starting to have those conversations. And then I would say when Flatiron opened and we validated scale, because that's kind of been the big thing, right? Is proof of concept with the first one, validating scale with the second one, and that you can operate at scale.
Yep.
And then, from there, moving to other markets, which is in the phase we're in now. So, these things are big projects. They take 2 years to build. So we knew that, hey, if we want to be in other markets and we don't want to wait 5-10 years, we got to probably start doing that a little bit early. So as soon as we opened Flatiron, we started looking at other locations, and that was a little over 2 years ago. And now this year we'll open 4.
We'll talk about the 4 that you're going to open this year.
So we're going to open 4 this year, 4 next year. So this year, in this order, we're going to open 1 more in New York and downtown Brooklyn. That'll be in probably late April. Then we're going to open Philadelphia, which will be probably around July. New Jersey, which is kind of a pilot for a suburban model. It's in the suburbs of New Jersey and Berkeley Heights. That'll be probably August. And then Chicago at the end of the year, which is a major kind of Midwestern flagship for us. That's a big location, about 50,000 square feet. And then next year we'll open Minneapolis, Nashville, Stamford, Connecticut. You're going to be my best customer there.
There you go.
And a big one in Los Angeles that'll be about 85,000 square feet.
Wow. So how do you think about, from somebody who's a self-admitted, in the real estate business, you like to be a lone wolf? Your words, not mine.
Yeah.
And you wanted to just concentrate on what you had to do, to all of a sudden being the co-owner of a national brand, maybe one day international brand, that is in cities across the country and construction projects across the country. Like, how have you evolved into that role?
I think look, I've learned a ton just being in my own business. And I think, trying to take the feedback that's obvious from our customer, from what's working inside the business, what's not working. But the big thing is I have a great partner that I have a great relationship with. So we're always on the same page. And so when you're kind of fundamentally aligned with somebody, everything else kind of works itself out. And I think Jason and I are very different. He's amazing at managing people and amazing at operations, which are two things that I'm really not great at. And then I like doing more the businessy stuff, the capital markets, dealing with the investors, the real estate, and then we collaborate on product and strategy. So, I think there was a period there where it's really clear where your strengths are. And
Yep.
so you just start cooking together, and it's really clear what stations you kind of belong on. And then you just play to your strengths. The big thing is I just try and avoid my weaknesses and play to my strengths.
I think that's a very, very important thing to do, especially if you have a partner.
Yep.
In any entrepreneurial venture, is to kind of focus, have different things that you guys are both good at, and really stick to what, kind of is your strong suit. So there's a real estate element in Bathhouse.
Yep.
Obviously. And it's not a traditional real estate food group. It's a kind of hybrid. What do you look for when you're looking for a new space, number one, and how has your skills that you had in the real estate business helped you in that?
Yeah, I mean, we have kind of an interesting business where our requirements for space are actually pretty difficult, right? But I guess in a weird way that makes it easier, because when we find a space that works, it really works, and it starts to become obvious. The first thing is I'm just a real snob about location, right? Like I'm not really a believer, like if you build it, they will come. You've got to build it in the right area to make it a really easy decision. So that's why, Williamsburg is on a great corner, Flatiron's Flatiron, Philadelphia, we're on Walnut Street, so on and so on. And then the other thing from my real estate experience was it was just kind of a natural fit for us to go out and go hunting for these spaces. So we take really large footprints. The other thing is we structure them. All the deals, the 8 that we have in development, are basically full build-to-suits by landlords. And that was a little bit novel for a tenant like us. Walmart gets build-to-suits. We're obviously not Walmart.
Right.
I always like to joke that we're somewhere between a coffee shop and a Walmart, probably closer to a coffee shop. And so how do we find these spaces with landlords that are interested in doing these structure with us? And so for me, it was just having conversations and finding the right person to transact with and the right opportunity. And as you have enough conversations with the right narrative and the right story, and deals kind of tend to form.
So I think one of the things that, whether it's a real estate business or an operating business like this, I think deal structure and capital structure and being creative and doing new things, can really, take a good deal and make it a great deal, or vice versa. And that's one of your strong suits that you've done and had background in real estate and have been doing now. Talk to me about kind of some of the creative structures, both, internally and externally, you've done that have you think have really made a difference or it's been unique.
Yeah. So the first 2 we did were really pretty traditional leases, right? We leased the space, we got some market TI, and then we had to capitalize the build out. The difficult thing about our business is that the build out of these spaces is really significant. We're a huge MEP component. We're building saunas, we're building pools. I mean, you can imagine how expensive it is to build out these spaces. So we did that a couple times. Then when we started thinking about, expanding, and it was like, okay, I think we can develop in a lot of markets. There's a path here where we can just use the cash we have, build one, then open that one, then build another one. But, that's a little slower than we want to go. And if we're going to build a lot at once, this is going to take a lot of money. And so the options are you can raise a tremendous amount of money, or maybe there's a creative thing that we could do. So the idea was, hey, because of our business and the nature of our business, we can actually afford to pay really great rents, probably more than other tenants. And we can also take space that a lot of tenants don't want. We love being in basements. We can take rooftops, but we don't need Fifth Avenue frontage that we're going to be competing with Chanel, right? And so maybe there's a way that we can go to a landlord and get them to capitalize it and then make that worth their while on a yield basis. And so that's basically what we did. So that was kind of the creativity to say, hey, this space has to be capitalized, but if the landlord's already doing a development project or willing to, or there's some catalyst where they're going to need to get a construction loan anyway, let's throw our capitalization into that. And on the back end, make them a better deal than they could ever get just renting the space on spec.
Yeah.
And then you get some creative landlords that see that vision and believe in you and want to make an even better deal. Granted, maybe taking on a little bit more risk, but there's risk to everything. If you don't have a tenant, you're building on spec. And so that was kind of the creative mindset that resulted in the structure that we've now rinsed and repeated a lot.
Awesome. So we're going to fast forward 10 years from now.
Okay.
In an ideal world, where do you see Bathhouse 10 years from now?
Would like to be a national brand and something that I think everybody is familiar with. I'm personally, sauna's really changed my life. And I know you're a big sauna guy too. And so I think a lot of people are being awoken to that. And so my hope is that we can be the household name as a venue where that's assimilated with kind of this new sauna culture that's emerged in America. I think it's already started. My hope is in 10 years is that, just like when you say, oh, I need to Google something, cool, let's go Bathhouse, right? That it's that ingrained in kind of the sauna culture in America. So that would be my hope, that we're in the markets that make sense. And, most markets have access and that people still love the product, that we can keep building wow products. We design every bathhouse unique. That's something that's important to us in all these major markets, at least. And so just to keep making it better and better and have the ones that we build in 10 years be even better than the last one we built, but still have the ones that were built 10 years ago be kind of this artifact that people are like, wow, that still really hits hard.
How has the product changed like in terms of from your original
Yeah.
Williamsburg space to, I know obviously every location is different. That's one of the really cool, unique
Yep.
things about Bathhouse is it's not just a cookie cutter as being like that, but how is the product and even the opportunities that change for the, for the new deal, for the new ones you're doing in, other markets and, around the country?
Yeah, I mean, the core of the business has stayed the same. It's really focused on sauna, and then there's a bunch of different thermal pools. You need all the support for that. You need lobbies, you need locker rooms. We always have a food and beverage concession component. I would say the big things that's changed is we've kind of focused even more on core and at a much more magnificent scale. So the saunas have gotten bigger, the pools have gotten bigger. One of the big things that's changed since we opened was we started our Aufguss program after we opened. So we didn't design the original space with that in mind. So now we build these huge saunas that are meant for Aufguss, and they fit.
Talk to I know what it is.
Yeah,
I've been there when you've been teaching. It's been incredible.
Yeah.
Talk to us about Aufguss.
Yeah, I would say easy to understand, difficult to explain. Aufguss is a sauna ritual basically that started in Europe, where a sauna master leads a session for anywhere from 5 people to, in ours, over 100 people. And they use essential oils on snowballs to kind of make aromatherapy, use a towel to distribute that around the room, create convection. It turns into kind of this awesome full 15-minute sauna session for guests. So we build our big saunas to house that. And then just variety, Bathhouse is mostly a kind of choose your own adventure, unguided experience. And so to make the product better and better, give the customer more to explore. And so that's been the big thing that's changed. A little bit more variety of saunas, bigger pools, more interesting moments for the customer to have and sit down and have a conversation, and trying to just get even better at that.
Awesome. So 22-year-old Travis is sitting down with Travis today and asking him for the most important advice he could give him to build a successful career. What are you telling him?
Work hard. Like I'm a big believer that hard work beats talent. I think you need a little bit of talent, but I also think you can acquire skills. I know so much more than I did at 22 years old, and it's just a function of working hard and trying to retain the lessons that you learn along the way. So, I would say make yourself valuable is the other thing. I think that's gotten a little lost. This, you and I have talked about this, but, I think as a young person where you're not really supposed to know anything about anything, how do you make yourself valuable? Right.
Yeah.
That was the big thing that I tried to do. I tried to be valuable for you guys as an intern. I tried to be valuable for you guys as a quasi partner, and then tried to create value for clients as I started. It's just, if you can make yourself valuable, and that's what we do at Bathhouse.
Right.
There's value in the market, and we can create a product and an experience that people have value in. So even just starting a career, how do you make yourself valuable in the situation that you're in?
One of the things that I think is just really incredible about watching you and seeing your career is just how there's really no rules, right? You've always worked really hard and you develop a skill set, you become valuable, you moved on to several different ventures, and then you started something completely different. And now we're in the process of building it into a national, juggernaut, for lack of a better word. And I think you've always followed your curiosity. You've limited your downside, and you have just worked tirelessly, and you're working on what you're passionate about. So that's something you can't fake. And I think it's something that's going to continue to serve you, and can't wait to see, what you do with Bathhouse and beyond over the next 10 years. So Travis, thanks for being here. It's been awesome.
Cool. Thanks, Sam.